My parents left my younger brother a near-million-dollar mansion in Los Angeles while I was handed nothing but a rotting shack deep in Montana's frozen wilderness. The day I heard the will, my fiancée hurled two words at me: pathetic loser. I thought my life was over until I opened that broken cabin door and uncovered a $60 million secret. That was the day my world flipped upside down. My name is Logan Reed. I'm 30 years old, the oldest son in a family that never once believed I was good enough. My younger brother Mason was the shining star, the one everyone pointed to with pride. My father Robert used to say Mason could charm the skin off a snake. He believed Mason had the fire to carry the Reed name forward, while I was nothing more than background noise. My mother Diane was gentler, but she never stood up against my father's choices. Mason was their pride. I was their afterthought. And Emily Clark, the woman I thought I would spend my life with, never bothered to hide how little she thought of me. We had been engaged for 18 months, and I truly believed we were building a future together. The truth hit me hard. She wasn't waiting to build a life with Mesh, was waiting for me to catch up to Mason's success. When she found out what the will said, she didn't just walk away. She tore into me with words that burned so deep they carved scars into my chest. That was the moment my story really began. The moment I lost everything I thought I had and was pushed into something I never expected. Even as a boy, I always knew I was just the background character in my own family's story. Mason was the star. If he wanted something, our parents bent heaven and earth to get it for him. If I asked for the same thing, I was told it wasn't practical, that I needed to toughen up. My father, Robert, treated life like a battlefield. He decided early on that one son was strong enough to lead and the other needed to be hardened or discarded. When it was just me and my mother, she was kind, almost protective. But in front of my father, she stayed quiet, nodding along to every decision he made. Mason played varsity soccer, and my father never missed a game. He stood on the sidelines screaming encouragement like he was coaching a champion. I remember once in high school I brought home a short story I had written. My teacher had called it exceptional. I laid it on the dinner table waiting for a single word of pride. My father barely glanced at it before turning back to Mason, asking about his goals for the next season. That silence, it was louder than any insult he could have spoken. And as I grew into adulthood, nothing changed. Mason thrived. He became a financial consultant in Los Angeles, driving sleek cars, living in luxury apartments, jetting off to Western Europe for weekend getaways. He flashed new watches, new suits, and people praised him for his confidence. I worked just as hard, maybe harder, but only in jobs that barely paid the bills. I tried to be proud of him, but I couldn't shake the heavy shadow he cast over every corner of my life. Emily walked into my life 4 years ago, and at first she felt like the rope that kept me from drowning. She was beautiful, ambitious, and filled with energy that made me believe in brighter days. She told me she loved how different I was from the men she usually dated. She said I had a soul, a heart. For a while I believed her, but love has a way of showing its cracks. And slowly her words began to cut instead of comfort. She started comparing me to Mason. Why couldn't I dress like him? Why couldn't I think bigger, fight harder, climb higher? At dinners, she would lean across the table, her eyes sharp, her voice a dagger. "Logan, how can you be content with this small life? Don't you want more? Don't you want to be somebody?" I would try to explain, telling her that not everything could be measured by money or status. She would roll her eyes, her lips curling. Tell that to the landlord when rent is due. Then the call came. Our family lawyer wanted us at his office to read the will. My parents had passed within months of each other. First my father Robert from a stroke, then my mother Diane, whose health crumbled without him. I was still stumbling through grief, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, there would be something left for me, something that proved I mattered. Mason strolled into the attorney's office like it was just another deal to close. He shook hands, joked with the lawyer, laughed like the outcome was already written. And maybe it was. When the will was read, it felt like a hammer crushing my chest. Mason was given a mansion in Los Angeles, valued at over $900,000, along with most of their financial assets. I was handed the deed to a remote cabin in the wilds of Montana. That was it. No balance, no explanation. Just Mason with a mansion and me with a ruin. I sat frozen, gripping the armrests, my face burning with humiliation. Mason smirked as if life itself had confirmed what he already believed. "Guess Dad always believed in me," he said, patting my shoulder like I was a child who needed pity. When Emily found out later that night, her mask cracked. She screamed so loud the neighbors could hear. A cabin. "Are you kidding me? Mason gets a mansion, and you get a shack in the woods. Do you even hear yourself when you talk about your life? You are a pathetic loser, Logan. You always have been." She threw the engagement ring onto the table like it was nothing and said, "I am not wasting my life on someone who will never amount to anything." Then she left, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I sat alone, staring at that ring until it blurred. I felt stripped down to nothing. In 1 week, I had lost both my parents and the woman I thought I would marry. Every old insult from childhood came back at once, and they played like an ugly song in my head. My father's cold dismissal, Mason's smug little victories, Emily's final brutal words. It was a chorus telling me I was worthless. For days, I kept the deed to that cabin in my pocket, pulling it out like a bad joke, reading the faded ink until the letters ran together. A rotten shack in the middle of nowhere, that's what it looked like on paper. What was I supposed to do with it? Sell it for scraps? Burn it down and pretend it never existed? The more I stared, the less sure I was that the paper told the whole story. Maybe the paper was a door, not a verdict. Maybe it was something I had to see for myself. One night when the traffic below my apartment sounded like a cage and the city felt smaller than a closet, I bought a one-way ticket to Montana. That purchase felt like breaking a chain. If this was all my parents had thought I was worth, then I needed to look at it with my own eyes. I needed to stop living by everyone else's judgment. The plane to Montana was small and rickety, shaking like a box caught in wind. I pressed my forehead to the cold window and watched endless swaths of forest and white, a world that made my New York life look tiny and loud. I kept the deed folded in my hand like a curse and a key at once, and I replayed Mason's smirk and Emily's voice. Pathetic loser. Those words cut deeper than anything my father ever said, and they followed me into the humming silence of the cabin. When the plane touched down, the outside air hit me like a closed fist. It was colder than anything I had ever felt in Los Angeles. Snow ground under my boots, the sky a flat, hard gray. A battered truck met me at the airstrip. The driver loaded my bag and drove me down a rough, icy road for 3 hours past frozen rivers and stands of dark trees, past houses that looked like ghosts. At the end of a narrow lane, he stopped and pointed. "That's as far as I can take you," he said. "The rest is on foot. The cabin should be about 2 miles that way." I paid him, slung my bag over one shoulder, and walked into a silence that felt like the first true test of whatever I might become. We drove past nothing but thick forest-frozen rivers and the occasional old wooden house that looked like a memory someone forgot to keep. At last, the truck stopped at the end of a narrow lane and the driver pointed down the path. "That's as far as I can take you," he said. "The rest is on foot. The cabin should be about 2 miles that way." I paid him, slung my bag over my shoulder, and started walking. The cold bit through my gloves like it wanted to find bone. Each step crunched solid in the snow, and the woods pressed around me with a silence so heavy it felt like someone holding their breath. No cars, no voices, no city hum, just my own breath and the sound of boots on white. When I finally saw the cabin, my heart gave a small, rueful thud and then sank. It was worse than anything I had pictured. The porch sagged like tired shoulders. One window lay smashed. The outside wood was blackened and crazed with rot. The whole thing looked as if the weather had been trying to erase it for years. I laughed once. It was sharp and short and tasted like anger. This is exactly the kind of inheritance you leave to someone you do not care about, I thought. I dropped my bag on the porch and pushed the door. The hinges screamed a raw, bitter sound as if the house itself resented being woken. Inside, the air hit me with dust and a smell of old damp and wood that had been dying for decades. Broken chairs lay where they fell. A couch had been chewed to a memory by mice. The kitchen sink was rusted through. Floorboards yawned and groaned underfoot like they might swallow you whole if you trusted them. I moved from room to room, and each one was worse than the last. I found a chair that still held shape and sat until the weight of everything settled on me. I buried my face in my hands and said aloud what had been echoing in my head for years. This is what they thought of me. This is all I am worth. For a long, ugly moment, I wanted to call Mason and hear his laugh through the line to feel that smugness like salt. I wanted to shout to demand why our parents would hand him a mansion and me a ruin. But I already knew what he would say. He would laugh and tell me Dad was right. He would say I never had the drive, that I was always the leftover son. The thought stung worse than the cold. That night, I unrolled my sleeping bag in the least ruined room and lay awake listening to the cabin breathe. Every creak sounded like a verdict. Every gust of wind rattling the broken glass felt like someone else's judgment. And yet somewhere between the wind and the silence, something shifted. I had come here feeling small and exposed, but the place itself, broken, forgotten, abandoned, felt honest in a way the city never had. I forced my eyes open and stared into the dark, thinking that maybe this ruin was not an end, but the first hard, honest thing I had been given. As I lay in the dark, I thought about Emily. Her face, her voice, the way she once held my hand and said she believed in me. Then her words from that last night returned, pounding in my head like hammers. Pathetic loser. She had spit them with such venom that I still heard them over the howling wind outside. Sleep never came easily. Every creak of the old cabin made me wonder if the roof would give way. Every gust made the broken window rattle like bones. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter and stared at the ceiling shadows, asking myself if I had made the greatest mistake of my life. Morning came with silence. The fire I had tried to build was dead, the cold sinking deep into my bones. I stumbled outside, breath clouding in the frozen air, staring at the endless trees. The cabin was alone, cut off. No neighbors, no voices, no one to hear me if I screamed. I had never felt more severed from the world. For a moment I thought of leaving, selling the land to anyone taking scraps of money, and vanishing back to Los Angeles. But the image of Mason in his mansion and Emily laughing at me anchored me in place. I couldn't crawl back defeated. That thought burned as I stepped inside again. I started clearing the wreckage, shoving aside broken chairs, piling rotten wood. Anger was fuel. Every plank I lifted, I heard my father telling me I was weak. Every sweep of dust brought Mason's smug face. Every door I opened, I heard Emily's sharp words. I muttered to myself, "There has to be more. There has to be a reason they left this to me." It was the only way to explain the cruelty. I couldn't accept it was just trash passed down like an insult. By nightfall, my body ached, but something kept me working. It wasn't hope, it was raw desperation. If I didn't uncover something, I knew I'd leave Montana broken and empty. Then, as I pulled back a dusty rug, I froze. A handle, a small iron ring, was set into a square wooden panel. I knelt, hooked my fingers under the iron ring and pulled. The panel gave with a long, sick groan of old wood and rusted hinges. A dark hole yawned beneath the floorboards, a hidden cellar. My heart slammed against my ribs. For the first time since I arrived, something other than despair sparked inside me. The metal handle was cold against my skin, and my pulse felt like it might burst. I leaned over the opening, breathing hard, staring into absolute black. A damp, earthy smell rose up like soil sealed away for decades. For a second I froze, the old caution settling in. Maybe it was only a storm shelter. Maybe there was nothing at all. Still, there was a stubborn voice inside pushing me to look. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag, clicked it, and aimed the beam into the hole. Narrow wooden steps dropped into the dark, worn, smooth, but seemingly sound. My stomach tightened as I set one foot down. The step groaned but held. Slowly, carefully, I went down the flashlight, trembling in my hand. The cellar felt colder, like a different season buried under the house. My breath misted in the light as I swept it across the room and stopped. Crates lined the stone walls. Metal chests sat in corners, some rusted, others oddly well preserved. A large trunk crouched in the far side. Dust lay everywhere, but the arrangement felt deliberate, purposeful. I crouched and pried at a crate. The wood splintered under my hands. Inside, bundles wrapped in cloth were tied with twine, stacked in tidy rows. I lifted one, untied it, and nearly dropped it. Gold coins stared back at me, heavy, dull with age, but still unmistakably gold. I whispered, "What is this?" and ripped open another bundle. Antique jewelry blinked in the flashlight rings, brooches, necklaces set with stones I couldn't name, but knew were worth fortunes. My pulse thundered so loud I could barely hear myself think. I backed against the wall, the flashlight clutched to my chest as the truth settled in like a weight. My parents hadn't left me a joke. They had left something vast and hidden. The weight wasn't just money, it was meaning. They had trusted me with this, not Mason. All the years had lived as the disappointment under my father's cold judgment and my brother's easy pride rearranged themselves in a single breathless moment. Now I was staring at proof that my parents had seen me differently all along. They hadn't chosen Mason. They had chosen me. The realization didn't just bring relief, it carried fear like a shadow. What was I supposed to do with all of this? Who else knew? What if Mason discovered it? What if Emily came clawing back into my life? My hand shook as I lowered the gold coins into the crate. This wasn't just wealth. It was weight. It was danger. I forced myself to keep going. In the trunk in the corner, I found leather-bound ledgers fragile with age. Page after page showed land deeds, mining claims, and business accounts nearly a century old. My family's hidden history was etched there. They had once owned vast land, and the papers hinted at resources still alive beneath the earth. One name kept appearing: my grandfather, Walter Briggs. I had known almost nothing about him, only whispers that he was harder than my father. But now I saw he had been building something that spanned generations. And here, in this secret cellar, my parents had placed it in my hands. I sank onto a crate flashlight balanced against my knee, struggling to breathe. For years I had believed the lie that I was worthless. And now I sat atop wealth so staggering it was almost beyond imagination's $60 million buried under a cabin everyone thought was trash. But it was also the moment of choice. I couldn't just leave it here and pretend. I couldn't run back to Los Angeles and shove it in Mason's face. That would unleash lawsuits, greed, even danger. And Emily. God, she would return the second she caught a whisper pretending she had always believed in me. I couldn't let that happen. So I whispered into the cold, "I won't waste this. I won't let them take it. I'll protect it. I'll prove you were right to trust me." For the next 3 days, I worked like a man possessed. I cataloged every chest, every bundle. I nailed the trapdoor shut, covered it with the rug, and cleaned the cabin, patching the broken window, fixing the fireplace, sweeping years of filth. Each small repair felt like reclaiming myself. This wasn't only money. It was identity. My parents had seen me as the one strong enough to carry this legacy, even if they never dared to say it out loud. Maybe my father's harshness had been a twisted way of testing me. Maybe my mother's quiet eyes hid something she never dared say aloud. Standing in that broken cabin, I stopped feeling abandoned. I felt entrusted. The bitterness I'd carried for years began to loosen. Emily's words still scorched, but now they fed me instead of breaking me. Mason's smirk still haunted the edges of my days, but it no longer defined me. Now I wanted him to see I was more than the shadow he assumed. That night, lying on the patched bed, the cabin didn't feel like a ruin anymore. It felt like a fortress. It felt like a beginning. Finding the treasure wasn't the climax. Realizing I had power and could use it was. The days after the cellar blurred into a rhythm of work fear and stubborn will. I cataloged each crate. Every box I opened proved my parents had hidden something extraordinary. Sleep came in fitful bursts as my mind raced through possibilities. I kept asking the same small, stubborn question, why me? One evening, with ledgers spread across the floor, I found a folded envelope tucked between pages. My name was on it in my mother Diane's hand. My chest tightened as I tore it open. The letter was yellowed but carefully kept. Logan, it began. If you are reading this, it means your father and I are gone. I need you to understand what we left you is not a mistake or a punishment. It is trust. Your father always admired Mason's boldness, but he also saw recklessness in it. He prized appearances over substance. With you, he saw a different strength, the kind that shows itself in patience, resilience, and heart. We knew you would protect this legacy, not squander it. Forgive us for how it may have looked. We love you, Diane. The words blurred as tears came hot and sudden. For years, I'd carried their silence as proof they thought me worthless. Now I held proof I had been wrong. They had believed in me all along. They'd simply shown it in a way I hadn't understood. I pressed the letter to my chest and felt something shift. Every insult from Mason, every dismissive word from my father, every cruel thing Emily had hurled, they all folded under the weight of that single truth. I was the one they had chosen, not Mason, not the golden boy me. But that truth also dragged a storm to my doorstep. Word of the will had already spread, and Mason began circling. He called one night, his voice sharp as glass. So how's life in your little shack? Realized yet that Mom and Dad left you garbage while I'm enjoying a mansion? Sell it? Logan, stop embarrassing yourself. Everyone knows you can't handle more. I wanted to spit the truth into the phone that the cabin was worth more than everything he had, but I bit my tongue. I'm managing, I said. My voice was steady, though. Inside, the fire roared. Mason thought he had won, and a dark part of me wanted him to keep believing it. Then came Emily. Weeks after slamming the door, she messaged me. Logan, I overreacted. I miss you. Maybe we can talk. Her words glowed on the screen, but in my mind, I still heard her venom pathetic loser. For one brief moment, I almost replied. Then I deleted it. She hadn't meshed, smelled whispers of money. I turned back to the cellar. As I sifted through more documents, the true scale of my inheritance unfolded. My grandfather had staked claims in Montana's wilderness rights to timber mineral veins, even oil still active. The gold and jewels alone were worth tens of millions, but the land rights potentially more. It struck me then my parents hadn't left me scraps. They had left me a future. Not a handout, but a second chance to rise not through Mason's shadow, not through Emily's approval, but through my own choices. That night I built a fire in the cabin. Flames cracked, shadows danced, and I held my mother's letter to my chest. I whispered into the air, "He'll protect this. He'll make it grow. You trusted me. I won't fail you." For the first time in years, I felt whole. The cabin was no longer rejection. It was proof of trust, of responsibility, of purpose. And the bitterness that had poisoned me for so long began to burn away in the fire's glow. I wasn't living for Mason's approval. I wasn't bending under Emily's insults. I wasn't drowning in my father's shadow. I was standing on my own ground, holding my own legacy. The climax of my story wasn't gold beneath the floorboards. It was the moment I finally shattered the chains of doubt and humiliation. The world could call me anything, but I knew who I was. My parents knew who I was. As the fire dimmed and the night fell still, I folded my mother's letter and slid it back into the ledger. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a loser. I felt chosen. The morning after, I stepped into the freezing Montana air, and something inside me settled for the first time in years. The cabin that had once felt like a punishment now felt like a duty. I gazed at the endless forest snow heavy on the branches, silence pressing against me, and thought, this is mine. Not just the cabin, not just the gold, not just the land rights hidden below. The choice to shape my life was mine. In the days that followed, I repaired the cabin with new resolve. I patched walls, fixed the roof, cleared broken furniture. Every swing of the hammer was a strike against my past, reclaiming myself piece by piece. My father had said I lacked drive. Mason had mocked me as weak. Emily had called me pathetic. Each insult burned like fuel, pushing me harder. With every repair, I proved them wrong. The cabin no longer whispered failure. It breathed of home. At night, I pored over the ledgers, tracing numbers, maps, deeds. They revealed a family history had never been told. My grandfather Walter had built something enduring, and my parents had chosen me to carry it. They hadn't spoken it, but their actions thundered louder than words. That truth reshaped me. Mason kept calling his messages dripping arrogance. Enjoy your shack, Logan. He'll be in Italy next month. Maybe he'll send a postcard from my balcony. His words only reminded me of the gulf between us. To him, success was measured in luxury. To me, it was measured in responsibility. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. And when Emily tried again, I already knew where I stood. Emily sent another message claiming she missed me and wanted to see me. This time she added, I don't care about what your parents left. I just want you back. But her words rang hollow. If I had ever truly been worthless to her, she would never have returned at all. She had caught the scent of money, and that alone pulled her back. I deleted her message without a second thought. For the first time, I felt strong enough to walk away without regret. Quietly, I began reaching out to experts, lawyers, and historians to verify the land rights and the value of what lay in the cellar. At first, I used a false name, careful not to draw unwanted eyes. Their replies confirmed what I already suspected: the collection was worth far more than I had dreamed. The mining rights alone could shift everything. The wealth was real, but so was the burden. Mishandle it, and I could lose it all. Treat it wisely, and I could build something that lasted beyond me. That was when the lesson struck hardest. My parents had not chosen me because I was louder, bolder, or smarter than Mason. They had chosen me because I would not waste it, because they knew I would carry the weight with care. Mason had been given something flashy, something to parade before the world. I had been given something hidden sacred, demanding patience and humility. One night, sitting before the fire, I read my mother's letter again. Her words echoed in my head. We knew you would protect this legacy, not squander it. For years I had ached to hear my parents say they were proud of me. I thought I needed their approval spoken aloud. But now I realized they had told me in the only way they knew, by entrusting me with everything. That was pride in its purest, most unshakable form. The man who had first stepped into that cabin was broken, humiliated, and desperate. The man sitting there now was someone else. I wasn't Mason's shadow anymore. I wasn't Emily's discarded fiancé. I wasn't the failure my father had branded me. I was heir to something far greater than money. I was heir to trust. So when I finally chose to leave the cabin briefly and return to Los Angeles, I carried myself differently. I didn't need to tell Mason what I had uncovered. I didn't need to flaunt it. Let him believe whatever he wanted. The truth was mine alone. As I boarded the plane, I imagined how quickly Emily would come crawling back if she knew. The thought made me smile. She would never hear it from me. In the end, the cabin had been more than an inheritance. It was a test. It was a gift. It stripped me to nothing, then forced me to rebuild not just the cabin, but myself. The gold, the jewels, the land rights, they were priceless. But the most valuable thing I found in Montana was the truth about who I was. If there is one lesson I want anyone listening to carry, it is this. Sometimes rejection is just trust in disguise. Sometimes the broken, forgotten places in your life hide the richest treasures. My parents hadn't abandoned me. They gave me the chance to rise. When I look back at the man who stepped on that plane to Montana, I understand something Emily once spat at me. She had called me a pathetic loser. Back then, maybe I was. But now I know with certainty I am not. So let me ask you this. If you were handed a broken cabin and inside it lay a fortune, what would you do? Would you sell it and chase the world's applause? Or would you protect it? Honor the trust behind it. That cabin in Montana changed my life. What I thought was the cruelest inheritance became the greatest gift I could have imagined. My parents hadn't left me behind. They trusted me with something bigger than money, something that shaped me into the man I was meant to be. I arrived broken, humiliated, and angry. I left chosen carrying a worth no insult could erase. If my story touched you, if it made you see your own struggles differently, do me a favor. Share it with someone who needs it, and tell me in the comments what would you have done. Would you walk away with the fortune or protect the legacy? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. Because even in the darkest corners, there is always something worth finding. All my life, my parents never cared to call me by my real name. To them, I was nothing but the dumb one. That label stuck to me before I could even read a single word. Meanwhile, my brother Ryan was treated like royalty, as if he were born to wear a crown. He was the genius, the pride of the Cole family, the one who made it to Stanford on a full scholarship. On his graduation day, my father, Richard Cole, stood tall before hundreds of guests, bragging about the empire Ryan was destined to inherit. He announced that Ryan would take over the family's $90 million company, receive a brand new Porsche Taycan, and claim our $15 million mansion in Los Angeles. The room erupted in applause, as though it were a coronation. I sat at the back, invisible, humiliated, wondering how I could ever crawl out of the shadow they had forced me into. And then it happened. A man I had never seen before stepped forward. He leaned down, slid a thick white envelope into my hands, and whispered into my ear, "It's time to tell them who you really are." In that instant, everything I thought I knew about myself and everything my family believed was about to be shattered. I grew up in a house where love was handed out like trophies, and Ryan was the only one who ever won. From the very beginning, my father made it clear who mattered. Ryan was the prodigy, the golden son, the one meant to carry the Cole name into the future. I was the other child, the one who never fit into their rigid mold of perfection. At family dinners, I always sat at the far end of the mahogany table. My father took the head seat, Ryan at his right, and my mother Laura glowing with pride every time Ryan spoke. By the time I opened my mouth, the conversation had already moved on. I learned that silence was safer than the sting of their rolling eyes. My father had a way of cutting me down with only a handful of words. I still remember one night when I was 14. Ryan had just announced he was accepted into an advanced science program, and the table burst with congratulations. My father lifted his glass and declared, "That is what it means to be a Cole. Excellence, leadership, brilliance. Then he turned to me with the faintest smirk. "And you, Ethan, you managed to pass gym class. I suppose we should be grateful for small victories." The room exploded in laughter. Even my mother joined in her laugh lighter, almost hesitant, as if she knew it was cruel but had long grown accustomed to playing along. The pain cut deeper than I could ever explain. It wasn't just the sting of the words, it was the weight of knowing they never believed I could be anything more. My mother Laura often whispered her comparisons when she thought no one else was listening. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" she would say, sliding a plate into my hands or passing me a pile of laundry. Her voice was calm, almost casual, but every remark sank inside me like a stone dropping into deep water. Ryan thrived in this world. He played the role of the perfect son with effortless charm. Tall, sharp-featured, and confident, he carried himself like the world already belonged to him. And he loved reminding me that he was the chosen one. When I turned 16, I worked part-time at a local diner just to save for the things I wanted. One evening, as I headed out for work, Ryan smirked from the living room couch, surrounded by our parents' endless praise. "Don't forget to wipe the grease off your hands before you touch the door," he sneered. "We wouldn't want the neighbors to think the Cole family keeps a servant." My parents laughed as though it was witty banter while I walked out pretending it didn't matter. But every comment like that chipped away at me piece by piece. The only person who ever saw me differently was my grandfather, George Cole. He had built the family company decades earlier, turning nothing into the empire my father now controlled. George was softer, gentler, a man who valued people more than profits. Whenever I visited him, he never asked about grades or accolades. Instead, he asked about my thoughts, my dreams, and the things that made me happy. One afternoon, as we sat on his porch, he leaned closer and said, "Ethan, never mistake their blindness for truth. You carry something Ryan does not. One day, when the moment comes, you'll know it. Don't ever let them tell you otherwise." His words stayed with me, though I never truly understood them. To me, I was simply the forgotten son surviving in the shadows of a family that measured worth by trophies and headlines. At home, life felt like a competition I was never allowed to win. My father trained Ryan like a soldier destined for greatness. By the time Ryan was still a teenager, Richard had already brought him into board meetings, let him shadow business deals, and told every guest who visited that Ryan was the future of the Cole legacy. I was never invited. Instead, I was told to mow the lawn, run errands, or stay out of sight, though my very presence was an inconvenience. It felt as though my very existence was an inconvenience, something to be managed rather than celebrated. The older we grew, the wider the gap between us became. Ryan's acceptance to Stanford was treated like a national holiday in our household. That very evening, my mother Laura threw a lavish party complete with catered food and champagne. Strangers congratulated me, assuming I must be proud. But behind my polite smile, I felt invisible. It was as though I had no identity outside of being Ryan's brother. By the time I turned 19, I realized I could no longer rely on my parents for love or validation. I worked multiple part-time jobs, saving quietly, building scraps of independence they never acknowledged. While Ryan returned from summers abroad with stories of Europe, I spent mine stacking boxes in warehouses and washing dishes. My parents dismissed my work as wasted time, never realizing it gave me a strength they could not imagine. Still, the weight of their judgment pressed on me every time we gathered as a family. My father's words echoed in my head. "Ethan, you will never amount to anything." My mother's sighs followed me down the hallways. Ryan's laughter reminded me how effortless his life seemed compared to mine. By the time his graduation approached, I had already braced myself for the humiliation I knew was coming. It was never a question of if they would favor him again, but only how public and how painful they would make it. I prepared myself to sit in silence to swallow my pride while they celebrated Ryan as the crown jewel of the Cole family. What I didn't know was that the life they had forced me to accept the one filled with shadows and shame, was about to collide with a truth that would shake my entire family. I had no idea that the envelope waiting for me that day would prove my grandfather's words right, and that my silence would not last forever. The day of Ryan's graduation was a performance from the moment I opened my eyes. My parents treated it as if it were more important than any holiday or milestone we had ever known. My mother Laura rushed through the house barking orders to the staff about floral arrangements, catering deliveries, and the guest list. My father Richard stood in the foyer adjusting his cufflinks, already rehearsing the speech he would deliver to the hundreds of guests. I had no role in this day except to sit quietly. My suit was one of Ryan's old ones, barely tailored to fit, and my seat at the ceremony had been placed far back among the rows, far from where the family of honor sat. I watched from a distance as Ryan walked across the stage, his gown flowing behind him, his name announced to roaring applause that shook the hall. My parents leapt to their feet, clapping with a pride so fierce it made my father's chest swell as if he were the one being honored. I clapped too, though every movement felt heavy, my stomach knotted tight. After the ceremony ended, the real spectacle began. Our family hosted a reception in a grand Los Angeles ballroom lit by towering chandeliers and polished wood floors that reflected the golden light as if the whole room had been gilded. Valets lined the entrance, guiding luxury cars as they pulled up in an endless stream. Guests from the business world, politicians, and family friends filed inside dressed in tuxedos and gowns. They hadn't come merely to celebrate Ryan's graduation. They had gathered to witness the official announcement of his inheritance. I did my best to remain invisible, pressed against the back wall, half hidden behind enormous vases filled with white lilies. My presence felt like nothing more than an afterthought, a courtesy extended out of obligation. People brushed past me, barely nodding. Some whispered, "That must be the other son," as if I were nothing but a footnote in the story they came to see unfold. Then came the moment I had dreaded. My father Richard climbed onto the stage with a microphone, his voice booming across the cavernous room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to honor my brilliant son, Ryan Cole." The crowd erupted in another wave of applause. Ryan, standing proudly near the front, grinned with the kind of confidence that had been fed to him his entire life. Richard pressed on his words, swelling with grandeur. "As many of you know, the Cole family has built more than a company. We have built a legacy. Tonight, I am proud to announce that Ryan will inherit the foundation of everything we created. The family company valued at $90 million, the brand new Porsche Taycan parked outside, and our $15 million mansion in Los Angeles." The crowd cheered wildly once again. Glasses clinked laughter, and applause thundered celebration, pressing down on me from all sides. I stayed in my chair at the back, my heart sinking lower with every roar of approval. My mother Laura leaned into my father's side, her face glowing with satisfaction, her hand resting on his arm as if to say, "We did it. Our perfect son has everything." For a brief moment, my eyes locked with Ryan's. He lifted his champagne glass toward me, but not to welcome me. His smirk was sharp mocking, as though he were toasting my failure. The message was clear. I had lost. He had won. I wanted to vanish, to disappear from a room where I was nothing more than a shadow. The humiliation pressed down on me heavier than ever. I thought of the years I had worked unnoticed, the nights I spent alone, hoping maybe that one day they would see me differently. But after my father's words, that small hope shattered in front of everyone. As the crowd cheered for Ryan, Laura passed by on her way to the stage. She stopped just long enough to whisper in a voice that cut clean, "At least don't ruin this day for your brother. Keep to yourself." Then she moved on, smiling as she reached for Ryan's hand. Speeches carried on. Toasts rose louder and louder, and I remained rooted to my seat. I clenched my fists beneath the table, forcing myself to breathe. Rage and sorrow swirled in my chest like a storm I could not reveal. I thought of my grandfather George, the only person who ever treated me as though I mattered. His words echoed in my mind. One day the truth will set you free. But how could that be true when everything around me declared otherwise? My parents had made their choice. They had crowned Ryan their heir. I was left to carry the title of the forgotten son. The shame sat in the shadows while the rest of the family basked in golden light. The division that had shaped my whole life was clearer than ever. I wasn't simply left out. I was erased. My father had announced it to the world, and the applause felt like nails being driven into a coffin. In that moment, I told myself I would remain silent, that I would endure this night as I had endured every insult, every whispered joke, every cruel laugh. I had no idea what the night held next. When the applause finally began to thin and the music rose again, something shifted in the room. That was when I saw him, a man in a dark suit moving with a purpose that ignored the noise and the laughter around him. He wasn't clapping. He didn't smile. He carried something folded in his hand, and his eyes never left me. He moved through the crowd with a determination weaving past clusters of guests as if the party had no hold on him. His stare locked onto me steady, and the air seemed to change before he reached my table. He stopped right then. He was tall, his features sharp, his expression unreadable. He bent slightly, placed a thick white envelope onto the wood by my plate, and leaned close enough that his breath ghosted my ear. His voice was low, deliberate. "It's time to tell them who you really are," he whispered. Before I could move, he straightened his jacket, gave the smallest nod, and vanished into the crowd as swiftly as he'd appeared. I sat frozen, staring at the thick white envelope against the polished wood. My fingers trembled as they hovered over it. For years I had been dismissed, mocked, and silenced. No one had ever suggested there was anything more to me than the role my family had written. I slid the envelope onto my lap and hugged it there, shielding it from sight. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might break through my ribs. I almost stood and left, then slipping out unnoticed, but the man's words kept looping in my mind. Who you really are. What did that mean? The speeches continued. Ryan now stood beside Richard, smiling as guests offered their congratulations. Their voices blurred into a distant hum as my focus narrowed to the sealed flap. I eased a fingertip beneath it and paused. A small voice inside warned me this could be a cruel joke. Another public humiliation, but another voice. George's voice nudged me forward. I tore the seal and unfolded the contents. Inside were several official-looking documents clipped together and a folded, handwritten letter. The papers bore stamps and signatures that made my breath hitch. My eyes darted across the first page and then stopped cold when I saw my name printed clearly, not as a footnote or mockery, but in legal terms. The shares of the coal company, the trust that controlled the $15 million mansion in Los Angeles, and accounts I'd never been told about, were all listed under Ethan Cole. The last page was a transfer of authority signed years earlier by my grandfather, George himself. My hands shook as I smoothed the paper. I unfolded the letter. His handwriting was steady and unmistakable. Ethan, if you are reading this, it means the time has come. I watched both of you grow, and I understood early on that the future of this family must not rest on arrogance or vanity. I chose you because you understand humility. You know what it means to endure without recognition, and you see people for who they are, not for what they bring. Do not doubt yourself. Everything I built belongs to you. I read the words until they blurred. My grandfather had chosen me. Not Ryan, not Richard, not the glossy version of perfection my parents worshipped. For so long I had let their cruelty define me. Now, here was the proof that the man who built our legacy had seen something in me they never did. My chest constricted with a wild mix of disbelief and a fierce, unfamiliar defiance. Part of me wanted to leap to my feet, rip the papers into the air, and shout the truth until the chandeliers rattled. but fear wrapped around my throat. Richard stood at the podium, oblivious to the shift at my table. The room still hummed with celebration. For a heartbeat, I was both terrified and electrified, terrified of what would follow if I revealed this, electrified by the freedom those pages promised. My father stood tall at the front of the ballroom, his voice heavy with authority, his reputation glowing brighter than the chandeliers glittering above. If I interrupted him now, if I dared to challenge his grand announcement, the backlash could crush me. The Cole name meant power, and Richard had spent his life protecting it with intimidation, control, and fear. But then every memory that had brought me to this night came flooding back. His smirk when he called me useless. Laura's whispers reminding me that I was nothing compared to Ryan. My brother's cruel jokes disguised as wit. The endless silence I had endured waiting for a scrap of approval. For too long I had let them decide who I was. The envelope in my jacket was no longer just paper. It was freedom. I closed the folder and pressed it firmly to my chest. The decision crystallized sharp and undeniable. I would not stay silent. Not this time. I would not let my father's voice drown out mine again. The music softened. Another toast began. Glasses lifted for Ryan. Cheers echoed, laughter rolled across the room. And I rose slowly, deliberately. My legs trembled, but my resolve was iron. For the first time in my life, I felt taller than the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. As I stepped forward, heads turned, whispers followed. Richard noticed me and frowned, his irritation plain. Ryan smirked, assuming I had come to congratulate him to play my role as the obedient shadow. Laura shook her head slightly, her warning as sharp as glass. But my grandfather's words thundered in my mind. One day the truth will set you free. This was that day. I climbed the steps, my pulse racing, my fists clenched tight at my sides. Richard leaned toward the microphone, his smile stiff false. Ethan. This is not your moment, he muttered under his breath. But I did not move. My voice, trembling at first, grew stronger with each word. Actually, Father, this moment belongs to me. The room froze. Guests halted mid-toast, glasses suspended in mid-air. Silence spread through the hall like a wave crashing over stone. Ryan's grin faltered. Richard's eyes narrowed with fury. I reached inside my jacket, gripping the envelope that carried the truth my family had buried. At the edge of the stage, with hundreds of eyes locked on me, the silence pressed heavier than any sound I had ever known. My father's jaw tightened as he stepped closer, his voice low but razor-sharp. Ethan, step down. You're embarrassing yourself. For years I had obeyed orders like that without a whisper of resistance. For years I had shrunk into the shadows whenever told I didn't belong. But not this time. My hand trembled as I pulled the documents from my jacket and lifted them high enough for all to see. I'm not the one embarrassing myself, I said, my voice carrying farther than I believed possible. You are. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ryan let out a shaky laugh, raising his glass as if to mock me. What are you doing? Sit down before you make a fool of yourself. I opened the envelope and unfolded the papers, the seal of the coal company glimmering under the ballroom lights. These are signed transfer agreements from George Cole. I announced, my voice steady now. He chose me, not you, Ryan. He chose me, not you, Father. The company, the Los Angeles mansion, the accounts, everything was placed in my name years ago. The ballroom erupted into a storm of whispers and stunned silence. Some guests leaned forward to glimpse the papers, while others exchanged uneasy glances, unsure what to believe. Richard lunged toward me, his face flushed crimson with rage. This is absurd. That old man must have been confused. He didn't know what he was doing when he signed those. His hand reached out to snatch the papers, but before he could, a firm, unwavering voice cut through the chaos. I knew exactly what I was doing. The crowd turned as my grandfather, George Cole, slowly rose from his chair near the front. His cane tapped against the polished floor with each deliberate step. Though age had bent his frame, his presence commanded more authority than anyone in the room. When he reached me, he placed a steady hand on my shoulder. I entrusted these papers to a man I could rely on, and I told him to deliver them when the time was right. That time is now. He turned his gaze across the crowd. I chose Ethan because I watched both of my grandsons grow. Ryan, you have brilliance, but brilliance without humility turns to arrogance. Richard, you built wealth, but you lost compassion. Ethan has endured neglect and cruelty, yet he has not hardened his heart. He will lead because he knows the value of every person, not just the powerful. The ballroom erupted again, this time with louder gasps and murmurs. Ryan's face drained pale, the smirk wiped away. "Grandfather, you can't be serious," he stammered. "I've done everything to make you proud. I've achieved more than Ethan ever could." George looked at him not with anger, but with sorrow. "You achieved for yourself, Ryan, not for others. That is not leadership. That is vanity. That is not leadership. That is vanity." Richard turned on his father, his voice cracking with desperation. "You would give everything to the boy who failed, to the one who never lived up to the Cole name." George's reply cut through him like steel. "I am giving everything to the man who will redefine what the Cole name means." The crowd fell silent, as if the chandeliers themselves trembled under the weight of his words. For the first time in my life, I felt the power of being seen, truly seen, not as a disappointment, not as a shadow, but as the rightful heir to something greater than wealth. I turned toward the audience, my hands no longer shaking. All my life I had been told I was nothing worthless, doomed never to measure up. Tonight you heard my father declare it again. But you also see the truth in my hands. My grandfather believed in me when no one else dared to. I will not waste what he entrusted me with. I will honor this family's legacy in a way that builds people, not just prophets. Applause began hesitantly, like uncertain raindrops, then swelled louder, stronger, until it washed over the hall, drowning out the silence that had suffocated me for years. Richard's face burned red with fury, but he had no words left. Laura's lips trembled, her perfect smile shattered. Ryan stood frozen, his glass still raised as if time itself had abandoned him. And at the back of the ballroom, the stranger who had delivered the envelope reappeared, his eyes steady, his expression unreadable. He gave me a single nod, then disappeared again like a shadow retreating into the night. Whoever he was, he had been the bridge between my grandfather's promise and this moment of truth. A rush of clarity surged through me. This was never just about inheritance. It was about breaking free from the chains my family had wrapped around me since childhood. The humiliation, the cruelty, the endless silence, all of it had led to this night where I finally stood unashamed. I turned to George and bowed my head slightly. "Thank you for believing in me." He squeezed my shoulder. "Now show them why I was right." When I faced the crowd again, I no longer saw strangers staring at the family failure. I saw witnesses to my transformation. I saw the end of the story they had written about me and the beginning of the one I would write for myself. For the first time, Ryan lowered his eyes, unable to meet mine. His smirk was gone, replaced by something he had never shown me before, fear. And in that ballroom, beneath the glittering chandeliers, I realized the truth. I had never been the dumb one. I had only been waiting for the right moment to reveal who I truly was. The applause faded into uneasy murmurs as the weight of what had just happened settled over the ballroom. My father's hands clenched at his sides, his voice low, bitter and sharp. "This is not the end. You have no idea what you're stepping into, Ethan." He turned abruptly and stormed out, his polished shoes striking the floor like gunshots echoing through the hall. My mother followed quickly, her eyes avoiding mine, her face pale beneath the layers of carefully applied makeup. She had spent her entire life building the illusion of a perfect family, and in one night it had crumbled in front of everyone she longed to impress. Ryan remained rooted where he stood, shoulders stiff, fists trembling around the fragile stem of his glass. He glared at me with a mix of disbelief and fury, as if I had stolen something he believed was already his by birthright. "You don't deserve this," he hissed through clenched teeth. "You're nothing compared to me." I met his eyes without flinching. For the first time, I did not shrink beneath his words. "Maybe I am not what you think I should be," I said, my voice steady. "But I am what grandfather believes I can be. And that is more than enough." The look on his face revealed the truth he refused to admit. He was afraid because the foundation of his superiority had finally collapsed. George straightened beside me, taller than I had seen him in years. Though he leaned on his cane, his voice carried the strength of iron. "This family changes starting tonight. The company is in good hands, and for once, those hands belong to someone who knows the cost of being overlooked. Ethan, the burden is yours now, but it is also your gift." His words sank into me with a weight both terrifying and liberating. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. Leading a company worth $90 million was more responsibility than I had ever imagined. But for the first time, I believed I could rise to the challenge. Not because I longed to humiliate my brother or prove my father wrong, but because I wanted to honor the faith my grandfather had placed in me. The guests began to applaud once more, slowly at first, then stronger, this time not for Ryan or Richard, but for me. The sound filled the hall like a tide washing away years of silence. My chest lifted as I stood taller, no longer hiding in the shadows of my family. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the chandeliers dimmed, I stepped outside into the cool Los Angeles air. The city lights stretched across the skyline, glowing against the dark. For years, I had looked at those lights as symbols of a world that belonged to everyone but me. Now they felt different. They no longer mocked me. They glowed like a promise, a reminder of something I had finally earned. I thought of the boy I once was sitting at the far end of the table, mocked and dismissed, invisible in my own home. I thought of the countless nights I lay awake, convinced their words were true, believing I truly was nothing. And then I thought of the man I was becoming, standing here with the truth in my hands, free at last from the cage my family had built around me. The lesson was clear. Being underestimated does not define your worth. Sometimes the cruelest judgments prepare you to lead with a strength no one expects. The labels others stamp on you do not determine your future. What matters is the truth you carry inside and the courage to reveal it when the moment finally comes. George joined me outside, resting his weathered hand on my shoulder. "You see now, don't you?" he asked softly. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "I see it clearly." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the glowing skyline of Los Angeles. "Then carry it well. The future is yours." I breathed deeply, letting the night air fill my lungs. The fear, the shame, the years of being invisible, they no longer had power over me. I was not the dumb one. I was the heir chosen not for perfection, but for resilience, for heart, for strength, forged in silence. And to those of you listening to my story, I have something to say. If you have ever been called less, if you have ever been mocked, dismissed, or pushed aside, remember this moment. Your worth is not defined by the voices that try to bury you. Your time will come, and when it does, the truth you carry will thunder louder than every insult ever thrown at you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me what part resonated most with you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.